You're listening to a podcast of spurious morality. Hello and welcome to a podcast of spurious morality. I'm Johnstone, and with me this week I have Greg.
Devil storms, Mr. Fibuli!
Excellent. And I have Jimmy.
Moons of madness!
And we're definitely all here for the key to time. It's season by season. We're back doing another one of these. So this is what I've been looking forward to, because for the first time we kind of have a season-long story arc to pick apart and discuss. As a result, we're going to do this across 2 episodes because we want to really be able to talk about that story arc. So we'll do that a little bit more next week. So this week we're going to discuss the first 4 stories from the Key to Time. We're going to collect the first 4 segments, and then we're going to go into a little bit more detail about how this is such a significant season and how it's kind of informed Doctor Who right through to today. I think it's fair to say that the Key to Time is definitely quite influential in the way that certain things have worked in New Who. And it's sort of quite interesting to compare the Key to Time to something like, I don't know, the Bad Wolf that we got in Christopher Eccleston's series, or maybe something like Flux, which was one big continuing story. So it's going to be interesting to kind of pick that apart. But before we dive in, let's ask the question we always ask, which is, what's your favourite story from this season? So go ahead, Greg, you go first.
So my favorite story from the season is The Pirate Planet, if you couldn't tell from my intro, just because of Douglas Adams' script and the performance of the captain. That being said, I would say probably the best story of the season is the first one, Ribos or whatever Operation.
Yeah, I think it's one of those seasons where it's very easy to have a favourite that isn't necessarily the best. I think there's an awful lot on offer here. It's a very, very varied season, but both very, very good shouts. What about you, Jimmy?
For me personally, I think the season definitely started off well, but I've got to give it to the Androids of Tara. I just thought it was such a good, fun story, and I loved the setting. It's definitely my favourite of the season.
Well, I'm going to offer something different yet again, because my pick would be The Stones of Blood, which I think it's a very clever story. I think it kind of sets off doing something rather quite Hinchcliffian, the word that we coined last time. And then it kind of flips that on its head and does something completely different. And I quite like the sort of mashup of styles that it offers. But we'll talk about that more after. So first one then is the Ribos Operation. I think it's a very universally popular story, isn't it? I often get surprised that this isn't mentioned in conversations about Stone Cold classics. We'll mention the Seeds of Doom, or we'll mention something like, I don't know, Carnival of Monsters, something like that. But this doesn't really come up in the big, really well-regarded Doctor Who conversations, and I think it probably should. I've never really met anybody that actively dislikes it. There's a lot of fun. It's a Robert Holmes script. We've got Robert Holmes double acts left, right, and centre. We've got witty dialogue. We've got all the stuff you'd expect. And it's a nicely paced story, and it sets up obviously the sort of season arc. It sets up the key to time. We see the White Guardian in his big wicker chair, and he comes across as quite sinister. Like he's threatening the Doctor straight away. As soon as we're in, the Doctor meets this weird godlike figure, and he's being threatened by him. So we kind of do dive straight in. There's no kind of discovering the season arc. There's no mystery as to what's going on. It is laid out straight away. Okay, Doctor, you've got to go and collect some segments of the key to time for me, and that's where we go from. Romana's introduced very quickly and doesn't particularly get on well with the Doctor. I quite like the antagonism that there is with the TARDIS team to start off with here, and they obviously do grow to get on a bit better. But Romana's definitely a different kind of companion to what we've had previously, to what we're used to, and I quite like it. I quite like that there's a bit of friction between the two characters. But yeah, really strong story, really nice start. I'm going to stop waffling and hand over to Greg, because you've said that you think it's arguably the best of the season. So go ahead, Greg.
Oh, I absolutely do. Quick aside before I start. I know it's Ribos Operation, but when I was a kid watching Doctor Who on my local station, there was a continuity announcer who would give like a little speech before every story, and he said Ribos Operation, and so I spent many years of my life thinking it was that, so I'm probably going to say Ribos more than Ribos, but that's why. Anyway, I like this story a lot because it's so low key and low stakes. I like it because it's really focused on the characters more than anything else, which I think is very important. I love the Garen and Unstuff like double act, that Robert Holmes is famous for. I love that the Graph is not really the villain of the story. I mean, obviously he's a maniac and he's the one threatening, but it's not really like about the Doctor versus him. He's just kind of there, like providing motivation to the story. I like that it all turns around a con basically, and I like the tone of it. It's very relaxed, and I love that it pauses to have the brief scenes with Binro the heretic, and hearing like Binro was right, and him looking off with this joyous expression on his face. I mean, that's the kind of thing. I mean, if you want to say it's padding, you can, because it doesn't quote unquote add anything to the plot or the characters or anything like that, really. But I mean, it's such a wonderful little bit of writing that it's just so nice. It's so pleasant, and I think that's important too, because you start off with this very portentous appearance of the White Guardian, and beware the Black Guardian, and that sort of thing, and you realize and you're expecting like this really epic thing to kick in, but no, like the season kind of ramps up as it goes. We start with a fairly low stress adventure. I mean, you certainly don't feel like the Doctor or Romana are in a great deal of danger here, and I don't think you're intended to. And yeah, I mean, it's also a great introduction for Romana. Like you said, she's a different type of companion. Not only is she a Time Lord, but also she's very willing to just challenge the Doctor directly to his face. And the Doctor, of course, doesn't like that, but this Doctor in particular really doesn't like that. And yeah, I mean, it's nice over the course of the season to see them grow together. But it's a good intro here. It sets up for an actual interesting Doctor companion relationship instead of just settling into the standard thing right away. So yeah, I mean, I think the reason why this isn't viewed as a classic is because it's just there's nothing all that memorable about it, I guess. Like, there's no iconic monster or iconic, villain performance or anything like that. But in terms of the quality of the story, I think it's very, very good.
Yeah, I think that's a good point actually about how it's as far as Doctor Who stories go, it isn't big, sinister, universe-ending, huge invasion going on. It's a con man being found out by someone who's a bit of a nasty piece of work, and that's the story. Yeah, I really like it. It is an awful lot of fun as well, and I agree with you about the bin row scenes. That kind of stuff should be in Doctor Who. Um, yes, you can easily argue it's padding, but you can also argue that the Graph wandering around ranting every 2 scenes is padding, or all this kind of thing. There's quite a lot there, and actually the bin row scenes are far more interesting than sort of trying to sneak around a Shrivensar, that kind of thing. So I think it's perfectly justified. The more of that there is in Doctor Who, the better. Jimmy, what are your thoughts on it?
I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty great, but I don't think I rate it quite as highly as you two do. I think definitely brilliant start. I love the little introduction with the Guardian and how wonderfully sinister he makes it when he just casually says that if the Doctor disagrees, nothing will happen to him, and then emphasise that with that, nothing ever, and wonderfully creepy for someone who's supposedly this great guardian of goodness. Um, and of course, Romana gets such a spectacular introduction. She's just instantly on fine form, like trying to take the lead and dressing down the Doctor. It's wonderful to see. It's great to have companions who are just not this typical, like mostly in the new series, every single companion, it's modern Earth, London this year. It gets a bit repetitive, and so someone as different as Romana is a joy to experience. And yeah, I think she gets a great start in this story and continues well throughout the season. But also, I would add, I love the Bin Row stuff. I think he just usually you get a minor character that has not that much to do, and they all sort of blend together after a while. But I think Bin Row just stands out, and just his joy when he realizes that yes, he is right, and people will say he was one day, and yeah, it's just such a lovely moment. But the other thing I particularly like is that it calls back to Peladon a bit, that you've got this sort of very much medieval style planet, and yet it's tied into the planet being sold by someone high up and all that. And it's just an interesting dynamic to put the medieval stuff with the more sci-fi stuff, which is again probably why I like Androids of Tara later in the season so much. I also love that line where Romana's disappointed that the guy was a crook, and the Doctor's like, well, of course he is. You can't be a crook with a dishonest face. It's nice to see that even though she's the sort of smarter, more taking the lead sort of companion, she still can be fooled, and like she's a bit naive here at the start. And I think it's good that they didn't just try to make her perfect. Like they showed how great she was, but they also gave her little signs that she wasn't quite there on the Doctor's level yet. Um, the thing for me that falls apart a bit is that some of the story, it's things that don't get explained very well, or that do seem to be padding. And I don't mean Bin Row with the padding. Like one thing is that seeker who just shrieks out her nonsense and then knows where the guy is. It's like, okay, are they saying magic is real on this planet? Like, is there some explanation we're not getting? It just sort of falls apart a bit, that we're just expected to accept, like, oh yeah, magic's happening, that's cool. It just feels a bit un-Doctor Who-y, like the sort of more magic stories that work, like Battlefield or whatever, like sort of tries to explain it. Whereas here it's a bit more like the Demons, which I don't like so much, where it's just like, just accept it, magic's happening. And the other thing that I do think was a bit weird with the padding was that whole extra bit where the second thief is trying to add this thing about, oh, and there's also this extra mine, and here's how you find it, and my dad lost it. And it's a bit like, they're already just selling him the whole planet. He'll own this hypothetical mine, whether he listens to you or not. Like, it just seems to be sort of dragging things on a bit and sort of trying to do the same plot twice. And I mean, the other crook gets annoyed at him, but it just sort of goes nowhere. And that just felt a bit silly. And the other thing is that with the planet being so medieval, it makes sense. But then you've got the Graph's guards with him, and they're also dressed medieval. And like you might think, oh, okay, they're blending into the planet, but it's a completely different sort of medieval style. It just sort of seems weird. Like, oh, they're space travelers, but they just happen to have medieval soldiers of a different kind to the medieval planet we're getting in here. It's like, I don't know, it's just doesn't hold together as well for me as it did for you, but I do enjoy it, absolutely. So overall, yeah, I think it's great. It's just, it doesn't quite work for me as well as it did for you two.
Lots of planets have a medieval costume shop. That's yeah. No, I haven't thought about that actually. Yeah, I suppose you'd expect the Graph's space soldiers to look like space soldiers, and that would have been a nice little contrast. It's never occurred to me before. I do kind of like the Unstop being a bit naive thing. It kind of reflects Romana being a bit naive as well, and I think there's a little bit of sort of relationship between double acts and companions going on there, which is obviously a big Robert Holmes thing. It's a very, very Robert Holmes story. This it kind of encapsulates a lot of his stuff. Perhaps you could argue the most. If there was a Robert Holmes sort of blueprint, this is perhaps the story that sticks closest to it of his. I don't know, maybe. But nevertheless, there's a lot to enjoy in there. It's a strong start for the series. It's a little bit unlike a lot of other Doctor Who, and it just when watching it, I always know that I'm beginning like a special season, like Key to Time. It is like a rather wonderful season. It does do a lot of things very well. It does a lot of things not too well, which we'll discuss as we go on. But yeah. We'll move on to The Pirate Planet then, which is Douglas Adams entering the Whoniverse, our first Douglas Adams story, and sadly the only credited Douglas Adams story that actually got finished. That is, and it's brilliant. The whole concept is utterly bonkers and the sort of thing that only Douglas Adams could come up with. The scale does go up quite a bit this time. We have entire planets being destroyed. There's a threat to Earth, even though none of the story is actually set on Earth. The humour that Douglas Adams is known for is most certainly there, and the story is far better for it. The Captain's a great character. Mr. Fibula's a great character. The Queen's a great character. The Doctor and Romana are just absolutely brilliant. What a fantastic pairing they pretty much instantly become. There's a lot going for this one. I think some people could argue that it is a bit too silly, but it's Douglas Adams. That's what you're going to get. It's just nice to have this sort of new and exciting voice writing for Doctor Who after we've had years and years of it pretty much being, Holmes, Dix, Bob and Dave, a lot of the same voices over again, or we've had a few 60s writers coming back in and doing something 10 years later or whatever. But I think that this is, I suppose we had Chris Boucher, didn't we? Previously, we had Chris Boucher over the last couple of seasons, but otherwise, this is our first new voice for quite a while. And what a voice, Douglas Adams. So, Greg, talk to us about The Pirate Planet.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just start by saying the reason why this story isn't I don't think it's the best of the season is largely the whole Mentiad plot. I feel that really drags and doesn't go anywhere interesting, unlike the rest of the story. That being said, I do very, very much enjoy this. You mentioned Bob Baker, Dave Martin there, and what I like about this script is that even though it deals with these massive, huge sci-fi concepts that would be completely unfilmable, there's no way they could show, a planet eating another planet, basically. But what Adams does that's smart is he keeps all of the really massive stuff off screen. So you don't have to actually show the big expensive sci-fi concepts on camera. You just refer to them. So there, we talk about the Calufrax being crushed into a ball, and we see the ball it is crushed into, but we don't see the titular pirate planet materialize around it, and crush it into nothing, because correctly understands that we're not going to be able to do that in anything remotely resembling a convincing fashion. So that's really smart, and I think the humor of it is something that's very welcome. Clearly, it's a precursor to what we're going to get in season 17, which is perhaps over the top, but I do love it. I think that Bruce Purchase as the captain is one of the great guest performances in all of Doctor Who. He absolutely commands the screen. Like it's rare to have someone who dominates just as much as Tom Baker. The confrontation scene between the two of them in the so-called trophy room is brilliant, and you can Baker is really trying there. I mean, he's really, he's acting, and it's not to say that he's not, always performing to some extent, but we all know that Tom Baker and the Fourth Doctor are very, very linked. But here, I mean, you can just see that he knows he's got someone who's competing with him for the spotlight, and so he needs to turn it up a little bit. Honestly, that I love that scene. I think it's so well written, it's so well done, but it kind of comes out of nowhere because you don't see that intensity from Tom anywhere previously to it. Um, and really, just the dialogue is fantastic. The interaction between the captain and Mister Fibuli is wonderful, and it has perhaps my favorite line in Doctor Who history, which is where the captain says, like, someone is using a counter jamming beam projector or whatever, find it and destroy it. And Mister Fibuli says, "Sir, do you think anyone knows what a counter jamming frequency projector looks like?" And the captain pauses for a second and then grabs the mic again and says, "Destroy everything." And I just crack up every time. It's so absurd, but it's so perfect. And yeah, I mean, it is a Douglas Adams story, like top to bottom, very obviously. And I love that we have that in Doctor Who. And this is a joy to watch for me.
It's just full of absolutely fantastic dialogue, and I love all of the pirate stuff. I love the fact that there is a plank. Like, one of the cliffhangers is the Doctor is made to walk the plank in this sort of very sci-fi tower thing. It's just so beautifully absurd. Yeah, just full of wonderful stuff. Jimmy, what are your thoughts on it?
For me, I think this story, the concept was a lot better than the execution. I love the whole idea of, the planet just materializes around other planets and, sucks them dry and all that. But it's sort of, it's hard to explain, but like the way that the people are just like so accepting of, oh yeah, new golden age, cool, and like you've you've got the Mentiad side of things, but you sort of get that hint of an explanation where it's like, oh, when the planet dies, a new person becomes psychic. Okay, but they don't really get developed. Like, you just sort of like, okay, they're the resistance, but you don't really get any hints of sort of why or how or any development of them, which is a bit disappointing. And everyone else just seems to accept the way things are, which sort of makes it a bit harder to care. But I do enjoy the story despite that. I just think that it just didn't quite work for me. Like, some of the things I love are particularly that scene between Tom and the captain, where the captain's trying to make him appreciate the destroyed, crumbled to a speck worlds, and Tom's just absolute fury in that scene is one of his best performances. I absolutely loved that, and I think that worked really well. And another little thing I liked was that bit where the doctor's sort of recovering from unconsciousness, and while he's semi-conscious and confused, he mumbles something about Janus spawns. And I thought it was just a nice thing that they were still doing callbacks to like Leela and the earlier eras, and rather than just acting like, okay, that's over, this is the new era, they can make that little call out. And so I enjoy things like that. Other things that didn't quite work for me were, I think the captain, I think, yeah, it's a really over the top, powerful, hammy performance, but I think they sort of tried to undermine it a bit at the end, where they're like, oh, the captain was good all along. He was actually working against Thanksy, and he was just pretending to be hammy. And then you also get that bit where, what was it? Oh, yeah, the other thing, when they do the reveal of, oh, the next planet that's going to go around is Earth, it just felt like they were undermining themselves, like, oh, the planet-eating planet isn't enough. It's destroying worlds that might be inhabited. That's not enough. Oh, we've got to make it Earth. It just felt like almost like the writers or the producers or directors or whoever decided, it felt like they weren't confident in the story. Like, oh, we need to make it Earth so that people care. Oh, we need to have an excuse for the captain being hammy. It just, I don't know, like, it's a good story, but it felt like they weren't confident in it, and you could see that they weren't confident in it, which didn't help. And also, I think another thing that was a bit poorly realised was that bird robot flying around. Like, they have that sort of nub in its face that's like, looks like a laser gun, and you think, oh, that's going to be its weapon. But then when it's flying around after K9, it's basically shooting the lasers out of its butt. It looks like the bird is flying around spraying everywhere. It's just really weird. Like, why give it the laser looking nose, beak, gun, whatever, and then not use it, and then have it, doing that? Like, surely someone must have noticed that looked silly. So yeah, it didn't quite work for me. I enjoy it, but of these 4 stories of this part of the season, I would rate it the least of them. But yeah, it's still enjoyable. It's still fun. And I think the fact that it's the least of them just shows how good the other stories are. It's not a insult to this one.
You see, I really like the polyphase Avatron. I think that's it's good to give K9 a rival. It's a robot for K9 to fight. And actually, this is probably K9's best season. Like, he's not in Kroll, is he? But he's in most of the stories. He's not missing for half of it. He's a fully functioning K9 Mark II now. And yeah, he gets used really well. Like, he doesn't just get dumped in the TARDIS or ignored completely or blown up every story, that kind of thing. We talked last time about how he's introduced an invisible enemy and then he's not in Imogen Fendal, he's damaged. And yeah, I think K9 is a character that just gets cast aside for the odd story. It's a bit of a shame. But this is a good season for him. He gets to do some good stuff. He gets some real heroic moments, like bringing down the parrot robot. So yeah, I quite like that. Even if I agree with you, it's a bit of a funny effect, the way it's done. But yeah, I like the fact that robot is there and that it's K9 that eventually brings it down, and he does have that little moment of bringing it back in, having vanquished it. It's rather wonderful. We'll move on then. We will move over to the Stones of Blood, which, as I said before, is definitely my pick of the season. It's an awful lot of fun. We've got some great villains, even. I've often seen it argued that it does kind of slow down and get a little bit less interesting in the final 2 episodes when we switch to the spaceship, which, yeah, I can see that. It's reasonable. The Megara do slow things down a bit, but we get this kind of comic, farcical courtroom drama that the Doctor just completely throws himself into, even though the sort of threat is quite serious. The threat is, we're going to kill you if we find you guilty, and the Doctor just seems to have fun with the whole thing. Some nice callbacks. We have a Wirren, we have an android, from the Android Invasion, which is quite strange because the next story is the Androids of Tara, which also has that android design in. So it's a call forward as well as a callback. But yeah, we've got lots of creepy goings on here. We've got druids, we've got ancient pagan gods, we've got moving rocks. Like the ogre are an absolutely brilliant idea. You know, what if the stones in a stone circle can come to life and it turns out they're actually vampires? Amazing. We've got one of the best guest characters in Doctor Who ever, like Professor Rumford. Nobody can possibly say a bad thing about her. She's such a wonderful sort of pseudo companion for this story, and you sort of wonder if Big Finish had her in mind when they came up with Evelyn and that kind of thing, because like the Doctor here works so well with this older woman, this character. It's just wonderful. Yeah, there's a lot of fun in this story, and I do like that pivot, that how everything just seems to change after the end of part two when we move to the spaceship, and it kind of gives the story a whole new lease of life. But yeah, like I say, there's a lot to enjoy here, and I think it's another one of those stories where Tom Baker's performance is enhanced by the guest cast, and I think that's something we see perhaps a little bit more of for the rest of his run now. He seems to switch it on and off a little bit, and knowing sort of what was going on behind the scenes and all that sort of thing, I think that was a decision. But when he switches it on, as he did in Pirate Planet, as he certainly does in this story, just fantastic, absolutely wonderful. So, Greg, talk to us about the Stones of Blood.
So we mentioned earlier, how Douglas Adams was, a breath of fresh air as a new voice coming to Doctor Who, and Anthony Reid, the script editor, basically commissioned two new writers during his tenure. One was Douglas Adams, and the other was David Fisher, who did The Stones of Blood and then did The Androids of Tara, and then did a couple other stories, including the original iteration of City of Death. So, I mean, that's a great hire too. And this story jumps out immediately because, much like how in season 15 you had Image of the Fendal, which was a very Hinchcliffian kind of story, Stones of Blood starts off the same way. Right, you're getting this very classic horror idea of a vampire story. You're using standing stones, stone circles as part of it, ancient druidic traditions, like all of this like classic horror imagery. And the story really leans into that for 2 episodes, right? I mean, you watch this and you think that this is going to be yet another, Hinchcliffe style story. Not a complaint, of course, like excellent era to emulate. And then you start getting more scientific explanations of what's going on about the ogre, and you realize, like, wait a minute, we're not just going with like these are alien vampires, we're actually explaining what they are. And now there's a spaceship and it's in hyperspace, and suddenly we're on the spaceship, and now there's floating robot lawyers, and it just takes a complete right turn for the second half and becomes an almost completely different story. I mean, Vivian Faye is such a different character from how she appears on Earth, and really the only blinking part of all of it is Professor Rumford, who, as you said, is one of the best guest characters the show's ever had. It's a wonderful performance. It's taking she's taking everything about 90% seriously, which I think really fits in well with Tom Baker's Doctor. Romana's very good in this. There are some genuinely scary scenes. I mean, the part where the Stones go out and kill the two campers is horrifying. Like, I remember seeing that as a little kid and having nightmares about it. Like, that's surprisingly dark for, especially for this era of the show. But yeah, I mean, I think the reason why it works so well is because it feels fresh. It presents us with all of these different situations. There's very very little padding in here. Like it works very well. I mean, I think one of the nice things about this season in general is that there are no bad stories. And while I don't think there's any necessarily all time classics here, I mean, to me, you can make a very strong argument that any of the first four are the best of the season, and Stones of Blood is among those, and it's very good. Yeah, I mean, I've been very satisfied so far. This has been a very good season.
Yeah, actually, we've had three pretty damn good stories already this season. It's looking positive, which I know that I'm fairly certain that you guys are going to start slagging off Pyrocroll and Armageddon Factor when we get to it next time. I quite like those stories too. Like, I don't think there is a dud in this season. I think it's dudless. But yeah, we'll get to that. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Is that a story by Douglas Adams?
You see, I nearly made that joke, and I decided against, and now I'm kind of glad you did it for me.
Yeah, I ruined it. Don't worry, it's good.
It's by Douglas Adams. Anyway, Jimmy, talk to us about the Stones of Blood.
Yeah, I enjoyed this one. I think it did the sort of magic-y stuff a bit better than like Ribos with its Seeker and that. I mean, it's still, there's some stuff that's not explained. Like, I mean, Romana being so almost superstitious, like when the crow arrives and she says something about it's evil, and it's like, okay, so it turns out the crows are spying for the Kyliak or whatever, but it just seems weird that a sort of scientist sort of companion, a logical companion, would just see this random bird and be like, evil. Like, you think, poor bird. And also on Romana, I think I loved her dynamic with the other ladies on the research of the stones. Like, before, of course, the Kyliak was revealed, I think that yeah, it was a good story for her to give her that dynamic with them and show her sort of fitting in on Earth relatively well. And of course, it is her first story that she's ever been to Earth because, of course, she's a Time Lord. So seeing it from that perspective, it works well for her. And um, yeah, I think the other thing that I quite liked was, like you were saying in a previous story, K9 does really well this season. And I think in this story, at one particular point, the Doctor and K9 were practically bickering like an old married couple. And I mean, usually K9 just gets, he says his information, he passes on, and the Doctor's like, yep, or whatever. But here they actually, really get into it. And I think it was nice to see that they're actually treating K9 like a character rather than just, information box or whatever. One of the other things I like is I do like the shift to a completely different style of story for the last half. I think it does really well to just suddenly turn everything on its head and go full sci-fi after having been a more Hinchcliffe horror. And I also particularly liked the bit where the Doctor, after De Vries has tried to kill him, and he basically says to Romana, oh, I'm going to check on De Vries. And she's like, what are you thinking? And he's like, even though the guy tried to kill him, he's concerned about his welfare. He's worried about him and wants to look after him. And I think that's a really great Doctorish moment. The other things that I might have to pick on is I think the line where Doctor says, oh, no, I'm not from outer space, I'm from inner time. It just seems, I know a lot of people think it's funny or clever or whatever, but to me it just seemed a bit silly. And I mean, it sort of works because it's Tom and he says weird and silly things all the time, but, it just didn't work for me personally. And the other thing I do like in this story is it almost lampshades something that happens a lot with Doctor Who, but it does it a bit badly when the Doctor comments on Romana's impractical shoes, and it's like, okay, yeah, a lot of the companions do go around in high heels and they shouldn't. It makes sense that you're going to pick on this. Nice touch, great, they're going to fix it. And then the new pair of shoes she puts on is still high heels. They're just slightly less high. And it's like, yeah, very 70s of you, very 70s. But yeah, it's a fun story. And I mean, I think the sort of Hinchcliffe callback works really well, but I also think the shift in the later half saves it and makes it a bit more unique and standing on its own. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, I really am a big fan of that switch in the second half of the story and how it, kind of deconstructs all the mysticism that we see in the first half, and there should be more of that in Doctor Who. I'm fine with there being magic, but I do like it when they kind of have the Scooby-Doo moment and, let's see what the magic was all along. Oh, it was science. And it does that very, very well here. But yeah, really, really, really strong, good, enjoyable story. I think it's an example of just lots of great things coming together. We've got a really solid script from a really good new writer. And great guest cast, great ideas in there. Yeah, it's a good one. And, we do have an excellent TARDIS team. I think because, the first Romana, Mary Tams Romana's only in this season, I don't think she gets sort of the credit she deserves. I think if she'd done another season, she'd be up there as one of the greats. She'd be mentioned alongside Sarah Jane and Tegan and whatever, Ian and Barbara. Well, let's move on to the last story that we're going to discuss today then, which is The Androids of Tara, another sort of meshing of medieval and technology and some really sort of bizarre, interesting ideas here. It's David Fisher again, 2 stories on the bounce. Great that we've got new writers coming into it here. And I agree with what Greg said before. David Fisher, absolutely brilliant. One of the great Who writers, I think. So yeah, Androids of Tara is very interesting, very different story. I didn't particularly like it when I was younger, and I think it's one of those that I've grown to appreciate over the years. It's fairly slow paced. It's got an absolutely brilliant villain, Count Grendel, wonderful villain. I'm amazed that Big Finish have never kind of tried to do something with him, considering he kind of gets away at the end. There's definite potential there for a return to Tara, which we're probably going to see in a Seventh Doctor box set 2 years down the line or something. I don't know, but here we are. So yeah, Greg, what are your thoughts on Androids of Tara?
This is the 4th very good story in a row. I enjoy this one a lot too. And I like it because it has some of that same sort of atmosphere as Ribos Operation. Like it's very laid back. It's very relaxed. I mean, here you have a defined villain in Count Grendel, but it's almost like this fairy tale kind of story with knights and princesses and princes and evil counts and so forth, and putting androids in as part of it, like having this overtly kind of fantasy based society that has electric swords and androids is really neat. It's something you haven't really seen in Doctor Who before, this kind of science fantasy sort of thing, like using like more fantasy tropes. um so that really works well to me. The dialogue is fantastic. Everything right up until the end when the Count leaps over the edge. Next time I will not be so lenient. Like it's just a delightful and enjoyable watch. And I also like how, I mean, next time we're going to talk more about the key to time plot arc, but I love how here, right at the top, the Doctor's like, I'm tired, I don't want to deal with this, I'm going fishing. And then Romana goes looking for the segment and finds it in like 8 seconds. And then the story, the conflict for them at that point is just having to get the segment back. And it's a little, it's refreshing to have one story in here where the mystery of what is the segment disguised as is not part of it. And I think that works well too. Like it's nice to play with the format a little bit when you're spending an entire season, dealing with the same thing. So I think that works well. That works very well. Um, I love the design in this. I love the set design. I love the costumes. It's another very, very good Doctor Who story. And like I said, if you said this was your favorite of the season, I would not argue. I mean, I think it's very good, and yeah, I think this season in general is very underrated, and it's because of stories like this.
I think it's, as we were saying, similar to Rebos, it is this low key thing. I suppose Stones of Blood's quite a low key story as well, all things considered. We've got the planet killer that is the pirate planet, but the other three stories we've had so far, they're about individuals and individual quarrels, and nothing really is affected outside of the small scale of the settings of the stories, and that works quite nicely. And in season 15, we had some fairly big epic stuff. We had we had a Fang Rock that's nice and small and claustrophobic, but then when you've got the invisible enemy, if the swarm gets out, it's a galactic sized threat. We have the Sunmakers, which is an entire planet and society, and essentially humanity's future is on the line. And Image of the Fendal, that's a universal destroyer, and Invasion of Time is a big double invasion of Gallifrey. And the scale just seems to have dropped here, and the budget can pretty much manage that, which, this generally, it's a good looking season. There's the odd little fault here and there, and, strange costume choice, or that really infamous, badly sort of finished. Is it a dial, like a countdown dial or something in Power of Kroll? It was so shoddy that there was actually a memo sent through the BBC saying, "Can we stop Doctor Who looking this rubbish, please?" But no, it works generally this season because of the scale that it's trying to work on. It does work, and it does look quite good. It's perhaps one of the best looking seasons of certainly the latter half of classic Doctor Who. Jimmy, what are your thoughts on Androids of Tara?
Yeah, this is, as I said earlier, my favourite of the season. I think it's got such a great atmosphere and such a great setting. And I mean, I love the blending of the medieval with the higher technology, and they sort of do gloss over it a bit in one sense, but I think they did a good job explaining it, like, oh, the peasants needed to make the androids because the plague killed so many of them, or the higher ranking people don't understand how the technology works because it's a peasant thing. I think they used those excuses well, and it covered things pretty well. And yeah, the atmosphere is amazing. I love the androids and how the society works with them. I think, yeah, the dynamic between Romana and the the real prince and such, like, yeah, it just really shines for me. I think as I said, the costumes too. I absolutely love Romana's costume in this. It's one of my favorite ones of hers. It's just the color scheme, like, it's not something that would be normal in a real medieval setting or whatever, but it really works for her. And um, I think the other thing is some of the turning tropes on their heads thing, with, like, when the prince has got the doctor captured, and it's like, you need to help us, I'll give you 1,000 gold coins to help me, and the doctor's just, ha, I don't care about money, make it 500. It's just, I love little things like that. And I think the dynamic of the prince and his retainers and the doctor is just handled really well. They developed this dynamic in no time flat, and it really works for me. I think the only things that in the story didn't work for me was obviously the Taran Wood Beast is hilariously bad, even by 70s standards. And other than that, there's a tiny bit of weird padding at the end where, when the doctor goes through his plan, oh, I'll get in, I'll open up the gate for you, and then we've got everything solved. And then he actually gets in and he reveals himself. He starts the sword fight with Grendel, And eventually, about halfway through the sword fight, their real prince is like, oh yeah, we should open the gate now. It just seems weird that they dragged it out a bit and the doctor didn't just open the gate and, skip the fight and win straight away. It just seemed a bit of padding there at the end to do that. But I think it works. I mean, that's only a small problem in the last episode, and really the bulk of the story is just so great, especially the dynamic between the Doctor and Romana at the start. They've only had a few stories together, but already he's trusting her enough to just be like, hey, you go solve everything, I'm going fishing. And I think it shows just how well Romana worked and how early she settled into the role. And I think it really makes the dynamic between her and the Doctor a unique one. And the trust he has in her so early is just, really great writing for both of them. And I love their dynamic together. And I think in this story is where it really sort of shines the most for me.
Yeah, and it's, we do get, obviously, it's a really good story for Mary Tam. This is, she gets to play two characters. We've got the whole double lucky-likey thing going on, without androids and with androids. And there is some rather nice sort of playing on that. And it's a story that uses kind of what it has to its advantage. I like that. So we've discussed 4 very, very good, enjoyable, fun, strong pieces of Doctor Who, 4 great stories. And I know that, general fan consensus is it is kind of downhill from here. Kroll's not overly popular and definitely tries to do something a little bit outside of what's possible. An Armageddon Factor, people accuse it of being boring. I think it's actually quite entertaining. Maybe it goes on a little bit, but it's a 6-parter. What do you expect? 6-parters do. So I'm looking forward to kind of getting back and discussing those 2 stories next time, and discussing, well, we'll talk about Romana as a character and maybe flashback to Leela, because we didn't really get to chat about Leela too much last time. And we'll talk about The Key to Time as a whole, as a story arc, as a Doctor Who's first sort of season-long story. But yeah, what we've had so far is really good and really strong, and I will always have a real appreciation of these stories, because I do think that this is kind of good, reliable late 70s Doctor Who, and I think that things maybe do get a little bit more variable from here on in. Maybe there's questions about consistency and quality throughout seasons and all that kind of thing that definitely start to rear their ugly head once we hit the 80s. But right now, this is just Doctor Who getting on with it and doing a good job. I think it's definitely fair to say that Graham Williams' second season is better than his first. I don't know if either of you want to chirp in and disagree with that at all, but I'm really enjoying 16 over 15 here.
It's hard to say for me. I think I liked them both. I think at its best, this season is a lot better than season 15 at its best, but at its worst, it's a lot worse than season 15 at its worst. So it depends whether you're going to value how high the highest height is, or whether you're going to value that consistency.
I guess so. I guess it's a little bit early to be making decisions like this, as we've not talked about the power of Kroll and the Armageddon Factor yet. But I really don't think that we sink to Underworld levels here. I really don't think we get anywhere near Underworld levels here.
No, we absolutely do not.
Right,
yeah, I was definitely forgetting Underworld. I was trying to think what's in season 15 and remembering everything else and being like, hey, it's better. And then you guys are like Underworld, and I'm just like, oh, yes, you're right.
Yeah, no, we all try to forget Underworld, Jimmy. It's fine. I can completely understand. But that does seem like, now we've mentioned Underworld, that definitely is time for us to stop. So we will return. we will return with the second half of season 16 and all the other stuff we said we'd talk about very soon. But for now, I will say thank you and goodbye to Greg.
Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
And I'll say thank you and goodbye to Jimmy.
Excellent, thanks. It's been a pleasure.
And we will be back soon with more Spodcasting. Goodbye now.